Sarah had a panic button in her pocket that looked like a car key fob. One press and Morrison's team would be there in minutes. The waiting was exhausting. Sarah found herself analyzing every person who entered her workshop, wondering if they might be Kowalski in disguise. She jumped at unexpected sounds. She had trouble sleeping, lying awake in her apartment wondering if this was all pointless. Maybe Kowalski was on the other side of the world. Maybe he would never come back. On the 16th day, something changed. Sarah was working on a particularly stubborn bolt assembly when she noticed a shadow fall across her workbench. She looked up to find a young woman standing there, someone she had never seen before. The woman was probably in her mid-20s with long, dark hair pulled back in a braid. She wore jeans and a plain green jacket. There was nothing particularly remarkable about her except for her eyes. They were sharp and observant, taking in every detail of the workshop. "Can I help you?" Sarah asked, keeping her voice neutral. "I hope so," the woman said. She had a slight accent, maybe Eastern European. "I'm looking for someone who really understands firearms. Not just basic maintenance, but someone who knows the science behind long-range accuracy." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. This was exactly the kind of approach Morrison had warned her about. Her hand moved subtly toward her pocket where the panic button waited. "I do precision work," Sarah said carefully. "What exactly do you need?" The woman pulled a folded piece of paper from her jacket and placed it on the workbench. Sarah unfolded it and found herself looking at detailed technical specifications for a Macmillan TAC-50 rifle, complete with calculations for bullet drop and wind drift at extreme ranges. The numbers went up to 4,000 meters. "Where did you get this?" Sarah asked. "From someone who needs help, someone who wants to know if these calculations are correct." The woman's eyes never left Sarah's face. "He said there's a technician on this base who would understand what these numbers mean. He said she's the best at what she does." Sarah's fingers found the panic button in her pocket. "Who is this person?" "I think you know who he is. He said you spoke once about cold bore shots and wind calculations. He said you were helpful and didn't ask too many questions." "Kowalski," Sarah said quietly. The woman didn't confirm or deny the name, but her expression shifted slightly. "He needs to know if a shot at this distance is possible. He needs someone to check his work before he attempts it." Sarah looked down at the calculations again. They were incredibly detailed, accounting for variables most shooters never even considered. The Magnus effect on spinning bullets, atmospheric pressure changes at high altitude, even the phase of the moon and how it might affect visibility. This was the work of someone obsessed with perfection. "These calculations are mostly correct," Sarah said slowly, buying time. The panic button was pressed now, hidden in her pocket. Morrison's team would be moving, but there are a few adjustments needed. The Coriolis effect calculation is slightly off. At this latitude, you need to account for an additional 6 inches of drift. The woman listened intently, and Sarah noticed something. Her right hand was in her jacket pocket, and from the way the fabric hung, there was something heavy in there. "A weapon, probably. Can you write down the corrections?" the woman asked. Sarah picked up a pen, her mind racing. She needed to keep this person talking, needed to give Morrison's team time to get in position. "These calculations, they're for a specific target, aren't they? Not just theoretical. Does that matter? It matters if someone's planning to break the law. I fix guns, but I don't help people commit crimes." The woman's expression hardened. "What he's planning isn't a crime. It's justice. The man he's targeting is responsible for the deaths of innocent people. Your government knows about him but won't act because of politics and diplomacy. So someone has to by making a shot from 4,000 meters? That's impossible. Even with perfect conditions, the variables are too many. The bullet would be in the air for over 10 seconds. Anything could happen, not impossible," the woman said. "Difficult, yes, but not impossible for someone with his skill. He's already proven he can make shots that others think are impossible." Sarah heard footsteps outside her workshop. Heavy boots moving fast. The woman heard them too. Her hand tightened around whatever was in her pocket. "You signaled them," the woman said, her voice cold. "He said you might, but I hoped you wouldn't. I don't help people hurt others, no matter how justified they think they are." The woman backed toward the door, pulling a handgun from her pocket. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. The woman wasn't pointing the gun at her, just holding it ready. "Tell them this," the woman said. "Ryan Kowalski is not a criminal. He's a soldier who was failed by the system he served. He watched his best friend die because someone made a mistake and nobody was held accountable. He spent months tracking down the people responsible, and he stopped them from killing more Americans. Your people should be thanking him, not hunting him. Then he should come in," Sarah said. "Let him tell his story officially. Captain Morrison promised he'd get a fair hearing." The woman laughed bitterly. "A fair hearing? They'll lock him up and throw away the key for disobeying orders. No, Ryan has one more thing he needs to do. One more person who needs to answer for what happened. After that, maybe he'll turn himself in. But not before the workshop door burst open. Captain Morrison and 2 CID agents rushed in with weapons drawn. The woman spun toward them, and for a terrible moment Sarah thought there would be shooting. But the woman was too fast. She threw something at the agents, a smoke grenade that exploded in a thick cloud of gray smoke. By the time it cleared, she was gone. Morrison ran after her, but Sarah knew it was pointless. Whoever this woman was, she had planned her escape route carefully. Morrison came back 5 minutes later, breathing hard and angry. She had a motorcycle waiting 2 blocks away. "We lost her in traffic." He turned to Sarah. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." She didn't threaten me directly. She just wanted me to check Kowalski's calculations. Foster arrived shortly after, along with a forensics team that began processing Sarah's workshop for evidence. Sarah sat on her stool, still holding the paper with the calculations, while agents took photographs and collected samples. "What did she say?" Foster asked, sitting down across from her. "Every detail, everything you can remember." Sarah repeated the conversation word for word. Both Morrison and Foster's expressions grew increasingly grave as she spoke. 4,000 meters, Morrison said when she finished. "He's planning another shot, even longer than the last one. Who could he be targeting?" Foster pulled out his phone and started making calls. Sarah heard fragments of his conversation. "Escalate to highest priority. Potential threat to high-value target. Needs satellite surveillance." When he hung up, Foster looked at Sarah seriously. "The woman mentioned someone who should be held accountable for what happened to Kowalski's friend. We've been investigating that ambush for months. There were several people in the intelligence chain who handled the information that led to that convoy being ambushed. Most of them were lower-level analysts who made honest mistakes. But there was one person, a senior intelligence officer, who falsified reports to cover up his errors." "Let me guess," Sarah said. "This officer faced no real consequence. He was quietly reassigned to a desk job. No court-martial, no public reprimand. The Army wanted to keep it quiet to avoid embarrassing questions about how our intelligence system could fail so badly." Morrison's jaw was tight with anger. "I didn't agree with that decision, but it wasn't my call to make. Where is this officer now?" Sarah asked. Foster and Morrison exchanged another look. "He's attending a military conference in Germany. There are going to be several high-ranking officers there. Lots of security. It's the kind of event where you'd think someone would be completely safe. Unless someone was willing to take a shot from 4,000 meters away," Sarah said quietly. "From a distance where security wouldn't even think to look." Morrison stood up abruptly. "We need to contact the conference organizers immediately. Increase security, move the venue if necessary. If Kowalski is planning what we think he's planning, we need to stop him before he throws away his entire life for revenge." "There's something else," Sarah said, looking down at the calculations again. "These numbers, they're not just theoretical. Kowalski has already found his position. He knows exactly where he's going to take the shot from. These calculations are specific to terrain." The flight to Germany took 14 hours with a brief stopover at a military base in Britain. Sarah spent most of the journey reviewing files on Kowalski, studying his service record, his marksmanship scores, and the after-action reports from the ambush that had killed his friend Danny Martinez. The more she read, the more she understood the depth of Kowalski's loss and his anger. Martinez had been only 22 years old when he died, a kid from Texas who had joined the Army to pay for college. The photos showed him smiling, full of life. He and Kowalski had been partners for 2 years, which in sniper teams meant they trusted each other completely. The death of a spotter wasn't just losing a teammate. It was losing the person who watched your back, who helped you survive. Captain Morrison sat across from her on the military transport plane, also reviewing files. He had been quiet during most of the flight, but now he looked up and caught her eye. "You should know something," he said. "The officer Kowalski is targeting, his name is Colonel Richard Vance. I knew him years ago, before he became the person he is now. He used to be a good officer, someone who cared about his soldiers, but he got political, started worrying more about his career than about doing the right thing. When that ambush happened, Vance was the senior intelligence officer who should have caught the errors in the information. Instead, he covered them up to protect himself." "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah asked. "Because I want you to understand that Kowalski isn't wrong about Vance. The man does deserve to be held accountable, but killing him isn't justice. It's murder, and it will destroy everything Kowalski has accomplished in his career. I don't want to see that happen." They landed at a military airfield outside Munich in the early morning. A convoy of vehicles was waiting, including German police and Army CID agents. Foster was already there, having flown in on an earlier flight. He looked like he hadn't slept. "We've located the observation tower Chen identified," Foster said as they climbed into a command vehicle. "German police have set up a perimeter at the base of the mountain, but they haven't approached the tower yet. We wanted to wait until you arrived. Has anyone seen Kowalski?" Morrison asked. No visual confirmation, but there's definitely someone up there. We've picked up heat signatures from the tower, and there's been some movement at the windows. Whoever it is, they're in position and waiting. The conference was scheduled to begin in 4 hours. Colonel Vance would be giving a presentation on intelligence coordination at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The conference center was a modern building with large windows, situated in a valley surrounded by mountains. It was an impressive location, but from a security standpoint, it was a nightmare. There were dozens of elevated positions that could provide clear lines of sight. The command vehicle drove through winding mountain roads, climbing toward the observation tower. Sarah could see the conference center below getting smaller as they gained altitude. She did some quick mental calculations. The distance was probably close to 4,000 meters, maybe slightly less. If Kowalski was really up there, he had chosen his position perfectly. They stopped about 1 kilometer from the tower. German police had established a checkpoint, and beyond that the road was blocked. Morrison, Foster, and Sarah got out, along with several other agents. The morning air was cold and thin at this altitude. We're going to try to make contact, Foster said. We've set up communication equipment. We'll call up to the tower, see if we can talk to him. They hiked the last kilometer on foot, staying low and using the terrain for cover. Sarah wasn't trained for this kind of field work, and she struggled to keep up. Morrison noticed and slowed his pace to match hers. When they reached a position about 200 meters from the tower, they stopped. The observation tower was old, built sometime in the early 20th century. It was made of stone and timber, with a circular observation deck at the top. Through binoculars, Sarah could see movement in the tower's windows. Someone was definitely up there. Foster pulled out a radio with a powerful speaker. He called up to the tower, his voice echoing across the mountainside. Ryan Kowalski. This is Agent David Foster with Army CID. We know you're up there. We know what you're planning. We need to talk to you for a long moment. There was no response. Then a voice came back, distorted by distance but clear enough to understand. There's nothing to talk about, Agent Foster. You know what Vance did. You know he got Martinez and 7 other soldiers killed. And you know he faced no real consequences. Someone has to make this right. Morrison took the radio. Kowalski, this is Captain Morrison. I understand your anger. I understand why you're doing this. But killing Vance won't bring Martinez back. It won't fix what's broken in the system. All it will do is throw away your life and your career. My career? Kowalski's laugh was bitter. My career ended the day I watched my best friend bleed out in the desert because of bad intelligence. Martinez was going to get married when he got home. Did you know that? He had a fiancée waiting for him. She still sends me messages sometimes asking if I know why he died. What am I supposed to tell her? That the Army made a mistake and nobody cared enough to fix it. Sarah reached for the radio. Morrison looked surprised but handed it to her. Sergeant Kowalski. My name is Sarah Chen. I'm the firearms technician from the base. We spoke once about cold bore shots and wind calculations. There was a pause. I remember you. You were helpful. You didn't ask questions about why I needed the information I'm asking now. Why 4,000 meters? Why push yourself to make an even more impossible shot? Because I need Vance to know. I need him to understand that no matter how far away he thinks he is, no matter how safe he feels behind his security and his rank, someone can still reach him. I need him to know that actions have consequences. Sarah looked down at the conference center far below. She could see people arriving, cars pulling up to the entrance. In a few hours, that building would be full of military officers and government officials. If Kowalski took his shot and missed, he might hit someone innocent. Your calculations are good, Sarah said into the radio. I checked them, but there are still variables you can't control. A gust of wind at the wrong moment. A change in air pressure. At 4,000 meters, you're pushing beyond what's reliably possible. You might miss. You might hit someone else. I won't miss. How can you be sure? Another pause. When Kowalski spoke again, his voice was quieter. Because I've been practicing this shot for 6 months. I've studied this location, these wind patterns, every possible variable. I've fired hundreds of practice rounds at similar distances. I know my rifle better than I know myself. I won't miss because I can't afford to miss. This is for Martinez. I have to get it right. Morrison took the radio back. Ryan, listen to me. We can't let you take this shot. German police are surrounding this position. You're trapped up there. The only way out is to surrender peacefully. I'm not trapped, Captain. I have a way out. I always have a way out. Foster pulled Morrison aside, speaking in a low, urgent voice. Sarah couldn't hear what he was saying, but she saw Morrison's expression darken. He came back to the radio. Ryan, we've evacuated the conference center. Vance isn't there anymore. We've moved him to a secure location. Even if you take your shot, you'll be shooting at an empty building. There was a long silence from the tower. Sarah held her breath, hoping this might be enough to make Kowalski reconsider. Then Kowalski spoke again, and Sarah heard something new in his voice, not anger but resignation. You're lying, Captain. I can see people moving around in that building through my scope. I can see security personnel taking positions. If you'd really evacuated, the building would be empty and the parking lot would be full of cars leaving. You're trying to make me hesitate. Morrison cursed under his breath. Ryan, don't do this. Don't throw away everything for revenge. Martinez wouldn't want this. He'd want you to come home to move on with your life. Martinez is dead because someone made a mistake and nobody cared. I'm making people care. After today, the Army will think twice before they let incompetent officers hide behind politics and bureaucracy. Sarah grabbed the radio again. Sergeant Kowalski, I need you to listen to me as one professional to another. I've spent my entire career working with weapons, understanding what they can and can't do. I know you're skilled. I know you've made impossible shots before. But this one is different. You're not just fighting physics and distance. You're fighting your own emotions. Anger affects your breathing, your heart rate, your judgment. Even the best shooter can miss when they're emotionally compromised. I appreciate your concern, Ms. Chen, but I'm not compromised. I'm focused. More focused than I've ever been. This shot is all I've thought about for months. It's all I have left. Sarah heard the sadness in his voice and realized something. Kowalski wasn't planning to escape after taking the shot. He knew this was the end of his story one way or another. He was ready to face whatever consequences came. Morrison must have realized the same thing. He looked at Foster, then at the German police officers waiting nearby. A decision was being made. We're going to have to storm the tower, Foster said quietly. Before the conference starts. We can't risk him taking that shot. If you do that, people could get hurt, Sarah said. Kowalski is armed and cornered. He might fight. We don't have a choice. The arrest was quiet and professional. Captain Morrison and the CID agents came up to the observation tower, and Kowalski surrendered without resistance. They confiscated his rifle and equipment, took photographs of his setup, and then escorted him down the mountain in handcuffs. German police watched from a distance but allowed the American military to handle their own. Sarah followed behind the group, feeling drained and emotionally exhausted. She had convinced Kowalski to surrender, but she wasn't sure if she had done the right thing. Part of her understood his desire for justice, even if she couldn't condone his methods. At the base of the mountain, Morrison approached her while other agents secured Kowalski in a vehicle. You did well up there, Morrison said. You may have saved his life. If we'd had to storm the tower, things could have gone very badly. What happens to him now? Sarah asked. He'll be transported back to the United States and face a court-martial. Desertion, unauthorized absence, possibly attempted murder depending on how the prosecution wants to handle it. He's looking at serious prison time. Sarah watched as the vehicle carrying Kowalski drove away. Will anyone investigate what he said about Colonel Vance? About the intelligence failures? Morrison's expression was grim. That's above my pay grade. But I'll make sure his testimony is heard. What happened to Martinez and those other soldiers? That deserves to be examined properly. The flight back to the United States was long and quiet. Sarah spent most of it staring out the window, thinking about everything that had happened. In the span of 3 weeks, her simple, predictable life had been completely upended. She had become involved in a military investigation, traveled to another country, and talked a troubled soldier down from making a shot that would have changed his life forever. When she finally returned to her workshop on the base, everything looked exactly the same. Her tools were where she had left them. The weapons waiting for maintenance were still lined up on the counter. But Sarah felt different. She couldn't just put her head down and go back to being invisible anymore. Over the following weeks, she learned what was happening with Kowalski's case through Captain Morrison, who kept her updated. The court-martial was scheduled for 3 months away. Kowalski had been assigned a military defense attorney who seemed genuinely interested in his case. The investigation into the intelligence failures that led to Martinez's death had been reopened, and Colonel Vance was being questioned. Sarah was called to testify at the court-martial. She told the panel of officers about Kowalski's technical expertise, about the calculations he had made, and about their conversation in the observation tower. She tried to convey not just the facts, but the pain and loss that had driven him to such extremes. The trial lasted 2 weeks. Kowalski pled guilty to desertion and unauthorized absence, but not guilty to attempted murder, arguing that he had surrendered before taking any shot. Witnesses were called, including soldiers from his unit who spoke about his character and his relationship with Danny Martinez. The mother of Danny Martinez testified tearfully about her son and about how Kowalski had been like a brother to him. The prosecution painted Kowalski as a dangerous vigilante who had gone rogue. The defense portrayed him as a dedicated soldier who had been failed by his chain of command and driven to desperate measures by grief and anger. Sarah attended every day of the trial, sitting in the back of the courtroom. She saw Kowalski in his dress uniform, standing straight and accepting responsibility for his actions. She saw the pain in his eyes when Martinez's mother spoke. She saw him struggle to maintain his composure when they showed photographs of his friend. On the final day before sentencing, Kowalski was given a chance to speak. He stood before the panel of officers, his voice steady and clear. "I take full responsibility for my actions. I deserted my post. I went AWOL for months. I planned to kill a man, and I would have done it if Ms. Chen hadn't talked me down. I don't deny any of that. But I want this court to understand why I did it. Danny Martinez was my brother in every way that mattered. We trusted each other with our lives every single day. When he died because of someone else's mistakes that were then covered up to protect careers, something broke inside me. I couldn't accept that his death meant nothing. I couldn't accept that nobody would be held accountable. What I did was wrong. I understand that now. But I hope this court will also acknowledge that what was done to Danny Martinez and the 7 other soldiers who died that day was also wrong. They deserved better from the army they served. Their families deserved better. And if my actions, if this trial, if any of this leads to real accountability and real change, then maybe some good can come from it. I'm prepared to accept whatever punishment this court decides is appropriate, but I will never apologize for caring about my friend, for demanding justice for him, or for believing that the army should protect its soldiers better than it did." The panel deliberated for 2 hours. When they returned, they announced their sentence: 5 years in military prison with the possibility of parole after 3 years. Dishonorable discharge from the army, loss of all military benefits and rank. It was harsh, but it could have been worse. The prosecution had asked for 10 years. Sarah saw relief flash across Kowalski's face before he composed himself again. After the sentencing, Sarah spoke briefly with Kowalski's defense attorney. "What happens to the investigation into Colonel Vance?" she asked. The attorney, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes, smiled slightly. "That's ongoing. I can't say much, but let's just say that Ryan's testimony has opened some doors that certain people would have preferred to keep closed. Vance is under serious scrutiny now. He'll likely face his own court-martial within the next few months." Sarah nodded, satisfied. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was something. She was allowed a brief conversation with Kowalski before he was transferred to military prison. They spoke through a glass partition using phones to communicate. "Thank you," Kowalski said, "for coming to that tower, for understanding." "I'm not sure I understand," Sarah admitted, "but I know you were in pain and I know you loved your friend. That much I understand. The shot I was planning, the calculations you helped me with, do you think I could have made it?" Sarah thought about the question carefully. "Honestly, I think you might have. The conditions that day were almost perfect. Light wind, clear visibility, stable temperature. You had done your homework. But there's always chance involved at that distance. Always variables you can't control. You might have made it or you might have missed by inches. We'll never know. Maybe that's better," Kowalski said. "Maybe it's better that I don't have to live with actually pulling that trigger. I think it is. This way you get to eventually move on with your life. In a few years you'll get out of prison. You'll still be young. You can build something new. What about you? Are you going back to your workshop? Back to your quiet life?" Sarah smiled. "I don't think my life is going to be quiet anymore. Captain Morrison offered me a position with CID, doing technical consultation on weapons cases. I'm thinking about accepting it. You should. You're good at this. Better than you probably realize." They talked for a few more minutes before guards came to take Kowalski away. Sarah watched him go. This skilled soldier who had been driven to desperate measures by grief and anger. She hoped he would find peace eventually. 3 months later, Sarah learned that Colonel Vance had been court-martialed and found guilty of falsifying intelligence reports and dereliction of duty. He was stripped of his rank and given a dishonorable discharge. It wasn't the same as what Kowalski had planned, but it was accountability. The system had finally worked, even if it had taken extraordinary circumstances to make it happen. Sarah did accept the position with CID. She still maintained weapons, but now she also consulted on cases involving firearms, ballistics, and shooting investigations. Her expertise was valued, and she found the work challenging and meaningful in ways her old job had never been. Sometimes she thought about that day in the observation tower, about the shot that was never taken. Kowalski had been right on the edge of making history, of pulling off a feat that might never be replicated. But he had stepped back from that edge, choosing life over revenge. Choosing to trust the system one more time, Sarah kept in touch with Captain Morrison, who had become something of a friend. He told her that the Army had implemented new oversight procedures for intelligence operations, partly in response to Kowalski's case. It was a small change, but it was something. Danny Martinez's death had finally led to reforms that might prevent similar tragedies in the future. On the anniversary of Martinez's death, Sarah drove to Arlington National Cemetery where he was buried. She placed flowers on his grave and stood there for a while, thinking about the chain of events his death had set in motion. A young soldier killed in an ambush, a best friend driven to desperate measures for revenge, an investigation that had exposed failures in the system, and somehow, in the middle of all of it, a firearms technician who just wanted to live a quiet life had found herself making a difference. As Sarah walked back to her car, her phone rang. It was Morrison Chen. "I've got another case that needs your expertise. Are you available?" Sarah smiled. "Send me the details. I'll take a look." Her life wasn't quiet anymore.